Steve Jobs. Before discussing the heights of modern technology, we must speak of the individual who sparked it all. Steve Jobs was not merely a corporate executive, he was an icon of boundless creativity and a fierce passion for aesthetic perfection. He possessed a complex personality, at once a stubborn engineer and a sensitive artistic soul with a vision decades ahead of its time. It was the turbulent chapters of his life that molded Steve into a resilient figure, a man who used his foresight to transform how humanity communicates and works. Apple. The brainchild shaped by Steve Jobs' own hands has grown into the technology corporation with the world's highest market capitalization. Under his masterly guidance, Apple established its position and dominated the tech landscape for over a decade. From the minimalist iPod and the revolutionary iPhone that altered history to the latest Vision Pro, when we touch these devices, we still feel the profound sense of infinite inspiration Steve left within every detail. The way he managed the business, his inquisitive mindset, his product development methods, or his approach to innovation and risk all serve as invaluable lessons we can draw from his life. Paul Reinhold Jobs. He grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. Paul did not finish high school but dropped out to become a mechanic. At age 19, he officially joined the Coast Guard. Steve's mother was Clara. She was born in New Jersey, and later her family moved to central San Francisco when she was a child. Paul met Clara after being discharged from the Coast Guard, and they built a happy, quintessential 1950s family. However, one piece was missing from their life's canvas. Clara could not have children. Because of this, they adopted Steve when he
Còn nhỏ, Steve Jobs đã biết được sự thật mình là con nuôi, và những ý nghĩ xoay quanh câu chuyện này đã ảnh hưởng đến cậu bé.
Affected him. At age 6 or 7, a neighbor girl asked Steve if he was adopted because his biological parents didn't want him anymore.
Những khái niệm đó đã trở thành một phần trong con người của Jobs và ngay cả trong phong cách sống của ông. Những người bạn thân của ông cho rằng chính những
chosen to adopt him. Being abandoned versus being specially chosen, these concepts became part of Jobs' being and even his lifestyle. His close friends believed these emotional wounds drove Steve to crave absolute control over everything he created. But this pain also helped him become more independent, choosing a different path to rise far above what fate gave him from birth. Besides trust, Paul Jobs passed on his love for mechanics and repair to his son. He pointed to a section of a workbench in his garage and said, "Steve, from now on, this will be your workbench." Steve was always impressed by his father's craftsmanship. He wanted everything perfect, caring even for hidden parts that ordinary people ignore. Those hours working with his father gave Steve his first experiences with electronics. Additionally, Paul's meticulousness influenced him greatly, nurturing Steve's passion for creating exquisite products. 7 blocks away lived a neighbor who strongly influenced Steve, Larry Lang. Larry was an engineer at HP, whom Steve described as a brilliant electronics expert. Once, while with Lang, Steve was introduced to a wireless microphone and speaker system. This contradicted his father's lesson that a microphone always needs an amplifier. It was the first time Steve realized he was smarter and sharper than his parents. Shortly after, he discovered his parents realized this too. Steve grew up torn between the feeling of being abandoned and being special. Perhaps this greatly impacted the formation of Steve Jobs' later personality. Steve Jobs. As he matured, Steve showed increasingly distinct traits. During his final high school years, Steve experimented with a strict diet of only fruits and vegetables. This made him as thin as a racing dog. He wore hair down to his shoulders and a scraggly beard, highlighting his crazy appearance. 17 years before adopting Steve, Paul and Clara committed to sending him to college, so they saved up. However, things did not go smoothly. Steve announced he wouldn't go to college, causing a fierce reaction from his parents. He didn't even care about Stanford, a school right near home that was ready to offer him a scholarship. Steve was Steve. He boldly insisted on Reed College, a liberal arts school in Portland with some of the highest tuition in the US. His parents objected due to financial barriers, but eventually yielded to Steve's ultimatum: if not Reed, then nowhere else. In college, Steve delved deep into spirituality. He admitted being profoundly influenced by books on this topic, notably Be Here Now by Ram Dass, which led readers into meditation and psychedelics. Jobs' attachment to Eastern spirituality, especially Zen Buddhism, was no passing whim. He pursued it wholeheartedly, reflected in his minimalist and refined aesthetic later on. Alongside spirituality, vegetarianism was something Steve followed throughout his early college years. The book that inspired this was Diet for a Small Planet. According to friends, Steve lived on Roman meal cereal, often buying large boxes for the week. This habit became even more extreme after he read Mucusless Diet Healing System. He believed eating only fruit and vegetables would stop the body from secreting harmful mucus, meaning he even quit cereal and bread. Steve's obsession with spirituality, meditation, and dieting was a quest for enlightenment in that era. Soon, Steve felt Reed wasn't what he imagined. He grew bored being forced to take required classes. Jobs only wanted to study what he liked, such as dance classes to satisfy his creativity and meet girls. Actually, Jobs didn't want to leave Reed, he wanted freedom from uninteresting subjects. Surprisingly, Reed agreed. Dean of Students Jack Dudman allowed Jobs to audit classes and stay in the dorms even after he stopped paying tuition. From that moment, Steve was free to take the subjects he wanted, including calligraphy, which honed his refinement and directly influenced Apple devices later. He learned about serif and sans serif typefaces and adjusting character spacing. Calligraphy was beautiful, classical, and artistic in a way science couldn't grasp. This proves Steve was a harmonious intersection of art and technology. Does Steve Jobs' rebellious nature in college surprise you? Share your thoughts in the comments and remember to like the video and subscribe. Stephen Wozniak. Stephen Wozniak was a friend Steve met in high school. Although Woz was 5 years older, both shared a passion for technology and music. Regarding electronic design, Woz was many steps ahead. While Steve was questioning carbon microphones, Woz used transistors to build communication systems. If Steve was the soul, Woz was the heart that created Apple. The 1960s were boom years for technology in the US, with electronics and processor companies creating a new culture. However, some kids felt lost, creating a counterculture rebellion. Initially, techies and rebellious kids didn't get along. The counterculture movement viewed computers as suspicious. But by the early 70s, computers became symbols of individuality and freedom. Giant corporations treated computers as routine, but the sandals-wearing rebels saw things differently. They were the ones who created the 21st century. In January 1975, the first personal computer, the Altair, was released, signaling the dawn of a new era. 2 months later, Woz saw it firsthand. The Homebrew Computer Club was seen as the merger of technology and counterculture. Woz attended the first meeting on March 5, 1975, and found the Altair's specs. He began designing a terminal with a keyboard and screen that could connect to remote mini-computers. That night, he sketched what later became the Apple I. Jobs was extremely impressed and helped finalize the memory parts. However, Woz was naive and believed in the club's philosophy of helping others, but Steve did not. He didn't accept that Wozniak's inventions should be free. That was the difference. Woz aimed for the middle, but Steve always had room for ambition. Eventually, Steve persuaded Woz, and they began their first commercial computers, designed to make an alien device feel necessary for every home. With Woz's technical skill and Jobs' reality distortion field, they opened the era of personal computing. Regarding the name Apple Computer, who would have thought of such a ridiculous combination? The name reflected the man. Apple was the fruit of his strict diet, placed next to computer to bring a friendly, lively feel to soulless machinery. On April 1st, 1976, Apple Computer was founded with 3 shareholders: Steve Jobs, Stephen Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne. Apple was born from such distinct aspirations. How do you rate this name? Leave a comment and hit like and subscribe. Ronald Wayne. Shortly after, Wayne left, leaving the Apple ship for the duo to steer. Woz handled engineering while Jobs took charge of business and marketing. The Apple I debuted at the Homebrew Computer Club. Woz presented how Apple surpassed rivals, but few listeners cared. Among them was Paul Terrell, owner of Byte Shop, who was impressed and ordered 50 units. Thus, Apple had its first order. Jobs' home became the assembly point, mobilizing everyone from friends to his sister. Steve didn't just make 50 for Paul, he made 100 more for retail. Jobs chose a retail price of $666.66, triple the production cost. Success came from their sales approach and superior design. Learning from Apple I, they created the revolutionary Apple II. Jobs realized the importance of an all-in-one package. After 16 years, nearly 6 million units were sold. Apple became a pioneer in Silicon Valley. However, pressure made Steve irritable, acting like a child. He wouldn't hesitate to call employees' work garbage. Jobs also had hygiene issues, believing his diet meant he didn't need to bathe. He even soaked his feet in toilets to relieve stress. Conflicts arose between Woz and Steve. Woz hated the childishness and friction Steve caused. During Apple II's design, Woz wanted 8 slots, Steve wanted 2. Woz stood his ground and won, but he felt his power overshadowed by Steve. Jobs' craving for control was a problem for the board. By 1985, Apple was a giant, but internal shadows grew. The Macintosh was born in this conflict. Steve used his reality distortion field to create a machine of giant power and elegance. He pushed the team to finish a year early, a crazy demand. Once, he complained the system took too long to boot. When the engineer explained, Steve interrupted, "If it could save a person's life, would you find a way to shave 10 seconds off?" He calculated that for 5 million users, 10 seconds daily meant saving hundreds of lives yearly. The Mac ended up booting 28 seconds faster. Many believe this behavior started in Jobs' stubborn childhood. Jobs used reality distortion not just to impose his will, but to evoke passion. Woz understood this when Steve told him he could design the game Breakout in just days. For the iPhone, Apple broke through with multi-touch technology while rivals stuck to physical keys. Steve even applied this to partners like Corning Glass to produce Gorilla Glass in 6 months. Steve was right. Reality distortion worked, but it also distorted his own soul. Perfectionism was his core principle, yet he was full of contradictions. He chased perfection at Macintosh and in management, leading to clashes with CEO John Sculley. Sculley was hired from PepsiCo in 1983 to professionalize Apple. They were soulmates initially, but soon Steve thought Sculley wasn't a product person, while Sculley felt Steve was too obsessed with trifles. When Macintosh sales disappointed, Steve blamed everyone. Tensions peaked as they fought for control. Steve plotted to oust Sculley but failed. On May 24, 1985, the plot was exposed. Jobs faced Sculley, but the board chose Sculley. Steve was kicked out of his own company. He walked out alone and sat in his house for hours listening to Bob Dylan. Apple was born from such distinct aspirations. How do you rate this name? Leave a comment and hit like and subscribe. Prometheus. In Greek mythology, Prometheus created mankind and gave them fire and knowledge. For this, Zeus chained him to a rock where an eagle ate his liver daily. Eventually, Hercules rescued him. If anyone identified with Prometheus, it was Steve Jobs. He brought technologies that changed how we live but faced punishment from higher powers. His suffering after being fired, the challenges of Next and Pixar, and finally returning to Apple was like being rescued. Jim Caron of the Wall Street Journal said the return was full of emotion. The room stood in applause as Steve returned to save his crumbling child. Since he left, Apple had lost its creative fire. Revenue dropped under pressure from Microsoft. The company realized they needed a leader with a breakthrough vision. Jobs returned as an advisor in 1997 and became CEO in 2000. He cut inefficient projects, focusing on a few breakthroughs. First was the iMac in 1998, then iPod, iTunes, iPhone, and iPad. Each product opened a new era, making Apple one of the world's most valuable brands. It would be foolish to conclude everything about Steve Jobs' greatness in writing. If choosing one image to represent him, it's the yin and yang. Steve saw the world as binary, either great or garbage. He once criticized Obama for not wanting to offend anyone. Steve was stronger. He had a unified ideal and used that power to push employees to be their best. Steve was a harmony between a genius engineer and a true artist. His hands turned rough technology into elegant beauty. That spirit lives in every iPhone curve and every font. Jobs was a marketing master who knew how to turn a soulless object into an emotional experience. The 1984 Macintosh ad is a prime example, but behind the glamour, Steve was still a child carrying an ultimate creative thirst. On August 24, 2011, Jobs accepted he could no longer serve as CEO and handed over to Tim Cook. In his final chapters, despite incurable cancer, he still thought of technology he could improve. What is his legacy? Everyone will have their own judgment of this great inventor or true artist. As for Steve, in his final interview, he said he had a very lucky career and life. We hope you enjoyed this video on Steve Jobs. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support us.